Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the HPNAP Operation Support Capital Equipment, or OSCE, Grant Information Session. The goal is really simple. By the end of the session, you should understand what this grant supports, how applications are reviewed, and most importantly, how to submit a strong and competitive application. This session is meant to make the process clearer and help set you up for success before you begin applying. Here's what we'll walk through together today. We'll start with the purpose of OSCE funding, then we'll review eligibility and allowable requests. After that, we'll spend time on how applications are evaluated and what reviewers are actually looking for. We'll also review required documentation, timelines, and what happens after awards are made. Before we talk about rules or applications, it's helpful to understand why this funding exists. The Hunger Prevention and Nutrition Assistance Program, or HPNAP, was established in 1984 as a result of public health concerns about nutrition-related illnesses among persons in need of food assistance. HPNAP, in partnership with organizations that serve the hungry, is dedicated to reducing long-term chronic disease risks and improve the health and nutritional status of people in need of food assistance. OSCE funding is designed to strengthen emergency food programs operationally. That might mean maintaining safe food storage, supporting staffing that keeps programs running, improving service capacity, or replacing equipment that has become a barrier to service. Ultimately, this funding helps programs operate safely and sustainably so you can continue serving your communities long term. Who can apply? Eligible applicants include food pantries, community meal programs, referred to as soup kitchens within this grant, and emergency shelters operating within our network. A few things to note are food pantries must be open at least once a month and have set hours. Community meals must be open for anyone to attend. And lastly, emergency shelters must not charge room and board or for their services. Applicants must meet several eligibility requirements to apply for HPNAP OSCE funding. To be eligible, your emergency food program must have been providing emergency food services for at least 6 months at the time of application and operate within FBST's 6-county service area. Organizations must also maintain active 501c3 nonprofit status and current tax-exempt standing, be in good compliance with HPNAP and FBST, and hold a valid food service permit where required. It's important to note that current food bank partners already have this documentation on file with us. Some additional eligibility notes are that incorporation is not required to receive HPNAP operation support funds. Programs with an existing direct HPNAP contract through the New York State Department of Health are not eligible to apply. And partnership with the food bank is not required to submit an OSCE application. If you are unsure about eligibility or required documentation, please reach out early rather than waiting until the application deadline. Within the OSCE grant, there are 2 funding classifications. The first classification is Operation Support, often referred to as OS. Operation Support helps cover the day-to-day costs required to keep your emergency food program running, such as staffing, utilities, space costs, disposable food service items, and transportation related to food access. These funds are intended to support existing emergency food programs serving low-income or food-insecure New Yorkers. It's important to note that Operation Support funding is meant to supplement your current operating budget, not replace it. This funding cannot be used to start new programs or create new staff positions, and submitting a request does not guarantee full funding of the amount requested. The second funding classification within OSCE is Capital Equipment, often referred to as CE. Capital equipment funding supports the purchase of large essential equipment used directly in emergency food operations. These investments help programs safely store, prepare, and distribute food while maintaining reliable and efficient service to the communities they serve. Unlike operation support, which helps cover ongoing day to day expenses, capital equipment funding focuses on long term needs that strengthen a program's operational capacity and food safety standards. Capital equipment funding is intended to support existing emergency food programs by ensuring that they have the tools and equipment necessary to operate safely and effectively. Additional eligibility requirements, funding rules, and examples of allowable equipment will be reviewed in the next section. First, we will talk about operation support. OS grants are awarded for one or a combination of the following 5 expenditure categories. First is staff costs. Funding may support staff or volunteers who are directly involved in food service or food storage, such as cooks, pantry workers, or individuals responsible for food handling and cleanup. Administrative roles such as directors, bookkeepers, or general maintenance staff are not eligible under this category. Next is utilities. Funding may support utility expenses directly connected to food service or food storage areas. This includes expenses like heat, gas, water, and electricity. Costs such as phone service, internet, trash removal, pest control, or utilities unrelated to food operations are not eligible. Then we have space costs. Rent or occupancy costs for areas used specifically for food service or food storage may be supported. If space is shared with other programs, costs must be prorated based on the portion used for emergency food services. Mortgage payments, property taxes, or administrative office space are not eligible expenses. After that, we have food service disposables. Single use items necessary for distributing food may be funded. Examples include plates, cups, utensils, containers, bags, foil, and packaging materials. Items not directly tied to food distribution, such as office supplies, cleaning materials, or sanitation supplies, as well as items already provided through HPNAP distribution, are not eligible. Lastly is transportation. Costs related to moving food from its source to your program site may be funded. This can include leased vehicle costs, fuel, or mileage reimbursement for personal vehicles used for food transport. Costs for delivering food from an emergency food program site to pantry recipients may be permitted due to COVID impacts. This is reviewed annually. We have confirmed with New York State Department of Health that OS mileage funding can be used for delivery of food packages or meals to clients' homes for existing delivery programs during the 2026-27 grant period. Cost for picking up food at the food bank of the Southern Tier is not fundable. So, when thinking about operation support, ask yourself, what expenses keep our current food program running safely and consistently? Those are typically your strongest OS requests. Now we'll talk about the second funding classification, capital equipment. Capital equipment funding may include items such as refrigerators, freezers, steam tables, commercial equipment, and other equipment necessary to safely store, prepare, and serve food. To qualify as capital equipment, an item must have a useful life of at least 1 year and cost $1,000 or more per unit. All equipment requested must be new and clearly essential to your emergency food program's operations. There are several important funding rules to keep in mind. Capital equipment requests cannot be partially funded, meaning the full cost of each item must be requested through HPNAP OSCE funding. Any equipment awarded through this grant becomes property of New York State. Each item will receive a Property of New York State label, and agencies are required to maintain an inventory of all awarded equipment. Equipment cannot be transferred, sold, or disposed of without approval from New York State Department of Health HPNAP program. When equipment requests are evaluated, priority is given to items that directly support food safety and program continuity. In simple terms, reviewers first look for equipment that ensures food can be safely stored, prepared, and served. Some commonly requested items are not eligible under this funding category. These include used or refurbished equipment, office equipment or computer hardware, air conditioners, fans, and dehumidifiers, plastic shelving, small appliances or kitchen utensils, vehicles, and installation or infrastructure costs such as electrical or plumbing work. So when considering capital equipment requests, focus on equipment your program truly cannot operate safely without. Requests tied to critical operation of food safety needs tend to score the strongest. Agencies may apply for operation support, capital equipment, or a combination of both funding classifications. The maximum request amounts are up to $6,000 for operation support and up to $8,000 for capital equipment. This brings the total maximum request amount to $14,000 per agency. It's important to remember that requesting the maximum amount does not increase your chances of being funded. Strong applications reflect clear, demonstrated operational need rather than simply requesting the highest allowable amount. At first glance, this sounds like a great opportunity, and it truly is. But there's an important piece of context to understand before you begin building your requests. The big question becomes, how much funding do we actually have available to award? In previous grant cycles, the food bank had just under $160,000 available to distribute. Using past application data and demonstrated community need, we advocated for additional funding and were successful in securing an increase of just over $40,000 this year. That brings our total available funding to $200,000. While this increase is incredibly positive, it's important to understand that demand for funding continues to significantly exceed available resources, both locally and across New York State. This is exactly why submitting a strong, complete, and well justified application is so important. To put this into perspective, during the previous grant cycle, agencies submitted nearly $330,000 in total funding requests through this grant. A total of 65 agencies applied, and unfortunately, 6 applications were not funded, largely due to limited available funding. At that time, the food bank had just under $160,000 available to award. This left roughly $170,000 in requested funding unmet. And that figure is actually slightly understated. The food bank was fortunate to have limited internal equipment funding available last year, which allowed us to move certain capital equipment requests out of the HPNAP OSCE pool and award just over $30,000 in equipment through an internal process. Without those internal funds, the actual unfunded need would have been closer to $200,000. It's important to note that the food bank does not annually budget internal funding for capital equipment support. Each year, we assess whether additional resources may be available, but this is never guaranteed and should not be relied upon when planning requests. What this ultimately shows is that the need consistently exceeds available funding, which again is why clear, thoughtful, and well supported applications make a meaningful difference during review. Before we move forward, here are a few important reminders to keep in your back pocket. This is a competitive funding process, meaning not all applications can be funded. Awards are not guaranteed, even for strong or previously funded programs. Funding levels may also change from year to year based on statewide allocations and available resources. And finally, OSCE funding should be viewed as supplemental support and not something agencies rely on as part of their ongoing annual operating budget. Now we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about awards, reviews, and scoring. All right, let's walk through how applications move through the review process. Once submitted through the grant platform, applications undergo a blind review by multiple evaluators. This means reviewers do not score applications based on relationships or familiarity, but solely on the information provided within the application itself. Each application is independently scored and then brought forward for an in-person review committee discussion where scores and recommendations are reviewed before final award decisions are made. The review committee includes one HPNAP agency representative from each of the 6 counties in our service area, FBST staff representing multiple departments, our New York State Department of Health HPNAP contract manager, and several community members. All funding decisions are made through group consensus. No single individual determines outcomes. It's also important to note that neither Amanda or I participate in funding decisions. Our roles during review are strictly to facilitate discussion and document committee decisions. As a smaller food bank serving a close-knit region, it's especially important that we work intentionally to eliminate any unintended or unconscious bias in the review process. That's why we use a blind review model. Reviewers do not see agency names or other identifying information when evaluating applications. They are scoring strictly based on need, clarity, and program impact. Because of this, applicants should avoid including their agency name or identifying details within narrative responses or uploaded documents. Including identifying information may result in point deductions during review. Examples of identifying details may include specific school districts, staff or volunteer names, town or municipality names, or the names of churches or organizations. Applicants are encouraged to keep responses generalized by using phrases such as our local church or our local school districts. This process exists to promote fairness and ensure we are striving for as much objectivity and consistency as possible across all applications. At the end of the day, reviewers are primarily looking for clarity and completeness. Strong applications clearly answer every question, explain how requested funding will improve or sustain program operations, include accurate calculations, and provide all required documentation. It's also important to remember that clear and direct responses are often more effective than lengthy ones. Reviewers are looking for understanding, not volume. You'll also notice that some questions are identified as bonus opportunities. An example of this might be weekend hours or evening hours offered. Agencies will not be penalized for not offering these kind of services. However, programs that do participate in those activities may receive additional points during review. So think of bonus questions as opportunities to strengthen the application, but not requirements for eligibility. Here's some quick notes on common point loss. Most applications do not lose points because of anything related to program need or impact. Most often, points are lost due to preventable administrative issues. Common examples include missing documentation, incomplete tables, vague or unclear explanations, calculation errors, or equipment quotes that do not meet eligibility requirements. The good news is that these are fully avoidable with careful review before submitting your application. An extra few minutes spent double checking your application can make a meaningful difference during scoring. Okay, now let's talk about how applications are scored. Applications are evaluated using a combination of objective and subjective measures along with potential bonus points. The objective portion of the score is fixed and standardized. It is calculated using measurable data such as your county location, program type, number of individuals served in the previous year, and how frequently your program operates each month. There is no flexibility within this section. The subjective score is assigned by reviewers and reflects how clearly and effectively the application communicates program need, impact, and readiness. This portion is influenced by the strength and clarity of your written responses. Bonus points are optional additional points that may be awarded for enhanced services or practices. For example, a pantry offering home delivery services may receive extra points. These are not required, but they can strengthen your application. For a final score, all scoring components are combined to create a total score, which is then averaged across multiple reviewers to determine the final application rating. Quick note about prioritization. If you are submitting multiple requests for support, it's important to carefully consider your priorities. Think about which items or expenses are most critical to maintaining or strengthening your program's operations, and make sure that priority is clearly reflected in your application. Priority rankings help reviewers better understand the operational importance and impact of each request. While these rankings help inform the review process, it's important to remember that prioritizing requests does not guarantee funding. Instead, it provides helpful context that supports committee decision making during review. Now we'll talk about documentation. Before applying for funding, it's important to make sure you are able to provide the required supporting documentation for the funding category you plan to request. Supporting documentation is a critical part of the application process. Documentation helps verify operational need and ensures reviewers are able to evaluate applications consistently and fairly. Depending on the type of funding requested, documentation may relate to the areas such as staffing costs, utilities, space usage, food service disposables, transportation expenses, or equipment purchases. Providing clear, accurate documentation helps strengthen your application and supports the information included in your request. Let's take a moment to recap the supporting documentation required for each funding category, starting with staffing. If you're applying for staffing support, remember that only direct service workers are eligible for funding. This includes individuals directly involved in serving, preparing, handling, or storing food. Administrative roles such as directors, bookkeepers, or general maintenance staff are not eligible under this category. Your supporting documentation includes completing the table provided within the application with relevant information to each position you're requesting funding for, a job description for each position. The document must clearly identify duties related to food service or food distribution, and please ensure that food service duties are clearly marked, bold, underlined, highlighted. The document needs to be readable when scanned, and the file includes a position title and responsibilities. Please note that yellow highlighter often does not scan clearly, and points can be deducted for this missing. There is also a text box provided in the application. You'll need to list all duties related to food service or food distribution, indicate the approximate percentage of time spent on each duty, and provide a brief summary explaining how this position directly supports food service or food distribution activities. The most important part is that reviewers should be able to clearly see the direct connection between staff responsibilities and food service operations. If you're applying for utilities, you will need to complete the tables provided within the application. These tables help calculate the maximum eligible amount based on utility costs associated with food service or food storage areas. Once completed, the table totals are combined to determine the highest amount you may request. Keep in mind, you are not required to request the full amount calculated. Agencies may always request less, depending on operational need. I also want to note that the preset fixed costs listed in the table in the application have been adjusted by 20% to account for increases in reported utility expenses over the past year. If you are applying for space costs, the space must be currently occupied and used directly for emergency food service or food storage. Applicants will need to complete the table provided within the application, as well as upload either a current rental agreement or a letter from the organization providing the space that clearly states the rent or user fee being charged. If the space is shared with other programs or activities, you must also include a floor plan, blueprint, or written allocation explanation showing the portion of space dedicated specifically to emergency food operations. If you are applying for food service disposables, you will need to list the specific items you plan to purchase, the quantity of each item, and the estimated price per case. If additional space is needed, you may upload a separate sheet or budget document. Be sure to include justification where applicable. Remember, only non-durable disposable supplies directly necessary providing emergency food are eligible. This includes items such as takeout containers, bags, plates, or similar distribution materials. You may complete the provided table within the application or upload your own detailed budget. And one very important reminder, save your receipts. You will be required to upload receipts or other proof of payment that clearly show the items purchased during first and second half reporting if awarded. If you're applying for transportation, you will need to complete the transportation table provided in the application or upload a separate sheet if additional space is needed. Transportation funding may support costs associated with moving food from its source to your emergency food program site. Eligible expenses may include leased or rented vehicles, fuel costs for leased vehicles, or mileage reimbursement when staff use personal vehicles up to the current GSA mileage rate, which is 0.72 per mile. If requesting leased or rented vehicle costs, additional supporting documentation will be required. Please note that transportation costs for picking up food from the food bank are not eligible expenses. And lastly, we'll talk about capital equipment. If you are applying for capital equipment, your request must include 2 signed quotes for comparable equipment, along with a completed equipment table provided in the application. Quotes must be truly comparable, meaning apples to apples, not apples to oranges. For example, a one-door refrigerator should be compared to another one-door refrigerator with similar specifications, not a larger or different model. Quotes should clearly reflect similar equipment features and capacity so reviewers can fairly evaluate cost and need. Please note that the food bank requires applicants to request commercial units rather than household units due to durability and warranty. While the food bank frequently works with Wilson's restaurant equipment and they are familiar with our grant requirements, agencies are not required to use this vendor. The requests are to be based on actual quotes, as temporary and promotional sale pricing cannot be accepted. And finally, remember that the quotes must be signed. Applicants are submitting in the spring, and award checks may not be issued until several months later. Signed quotes help ensure pricing remains valid for the full grant timeline. It's recommended to get your quote to be made valid through the end of August. Where can you apply? All applications must be submitted through the FBST Grant Management Platform. Email or paper submissions cannot be accepted. For current food bank partners, this platform should already be familiar, as most partner applications and grant processes are completed through this system. Submit early. Submitting your application early can provide a significant advantage. Applications submitted ahead of the deadline may receive an FBST review, allowing time for you to make edits or correct missing information before a final submission. While this review is not guaranteed to take place, submitting early remains one of the most effective ways to strengthen your application before the deadline. You were awarded. What's next? Settle in, this is a bit of a long one. So, New York State Department of Health has issued new guidance on how operation support awarding must take place. This will be different from how we typically issued awards in years past. So, if awarded, agencies will receive a notification email with an assigned task to complete their award agreement and submit a W-9 if one is not already on file with the food bank. These items must be completed within 1 week of notification. Late grant agreements result in the forfeit of the full grant award and become ineligible to apply for the next grant year. This is not new. However, Operation Support funding will be distributed in 2 phases. For Phase 1, the initial payment, agencies will receive 50% of the total award amount after the award agreement is completed and the W-9 is verified. These funds must be deposited into your agency's official bank account upon receipt. Following that initial payment, agencies will be responsible for completing their first half documentation report. These are for funds spent between July 1st, 2026 and December 31st, 2026. This will be due on January 29th, 2027. Note that late first half documentation will result in the forfeit of the final payment and become ineligible to apply for the next grant year. Which brings us to Phase 2, the final payment. The remaining 50% of the award will be distributed after the first half documentation report is reviewed and approved. Agencies' prompt submission of documentation will allow reviews to be completed sooner and remaining funds to be released more quickly. Final payments are anticipated in early March 2027. The funds must also be deposited into your agency's official bank account upon receipt. Agencies will then be responsible for completing their second half documentation report. This is for funds spent between January 1st, 2027 and June 30th, 2027. This will be due on July 30th, 2027. Note that second half documentation being late will result in having to return the final payment to the food bank in full and become ineligible to apply for the next grant year. All unspent operation support funds must be returned to the food bank by June 1st, 2027. For capital equipment awards, the award process remains the same. Your agency must verify the purchase price of the equipment, sign the award agreement, and submit a W-9 if one is not on file with the food bank. Those will be due within 1 week of notification. After those are verified, agencies will receive 1 check for the full approved amount for the equipment. The equipment should be purchased as soon as possible after the funds are received. By October 1st, 2026, agencies must submit their capital equipment follow-up documentation. This will be a copy of the equipment invoice and proof of payment, which could be a receipt, canceled check, or a bank statement. Here are the key dates to keep in mind for this year's grant cycle. The grant will officially open on March 9th. Applications are due by Friday, May 15th. Late applications will be accepted through Friday, May 22nd, with a few additional important conditions. Applications must already be saved in draft status by the original deadline of May 15th, and they will be submitted as is. This means that the food bank will not be able to review for edits, missing documentation, or corrections, and point deductions will apply for late submissions. The review committee will meet in June, with the award notifications anticipated by the end of June, and funding payments are expected to begin in July. The Community Impact Team is available to support agencies throughout the entire application period. If you need application support, contact your Programs and Partnership Coordinator. If you need technical support, you may reach out to your Programs and Partnership Coordinator, or you may contact the Community Impact Administration Team. If you also need support, you may attend office hours. That's another great resource to ask questions at. We strongly encourage you to reach out with questions early rather than waiting until deadlines. Early communication allows for more time to provide guidance and help address questions before submission. And that concludes the formal overview of this grant process. Thank you for taking the time to attend this info session. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at any time.